One of the key U.S. government agencies addressing the challenges Daniel Yergin described is the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce plays an important role in promoting job creation, trade, and economic growth, not to mention overseeing the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, which helps bolster U.S. innovation and leadership across the globe. I was fortunate to have the opportunity recently to sit down with Deputy Secretary of Commerce Don Graves to get his perspective about key issues facing the auto sector, but also some of the key initiatives that he, along with Secretary Raimondo, are putting forward. Well, Deputy Secretary Graves, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and to have a conversation. It means a great deal to us in the auto industry as we think about the economy today and the economic future for the industry and for the country.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you and particularly to focus on these sets of issues, because I think it's absolutely critical that we do what we can to help drive this transformation, this evolution of the industry for the long-term competitiveness of the country.
And that really is what it is about, I think, as well. It's about our transformation, and it is about our competitiveness as well. I want to start with the mission of the department and your priorities. So maybe you can spend a few minutes walking through those for me.
I'd be happy to. So a lot of people think about the Department of Commerce as the Department of Business, which we are. We certainly work with business to try and find ways to drive economic growth and competitiveness. But beyond that, we're also the Department of People and Communities, because we know that businesses are only going to be as successful as the people and the communities in which they operate. And so we're really focused as a department on all the ways that we can help drive long-term economic vibrancy and success for our entire country, whether it's using our science, our data, our ability to innovate, to protect intellectual property, to invest in communities, to support workforce development, and generally to find ways to drive that innovative spirit that really is at the core of who we are as a people.
Yeah, there's so much there that you've covered, and a lot that I think folks in the auto industry, whether they're people who work on the plant floor or people who are in the executive suites, can certainly relate to. I want to, talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're seeing in the supply chain and with regard to key components like semiconductors. But as you talked about the economy, I was reflecting there are 10 million Americans that rely in one way or another on the auto industry for their livelihoods, and they are working and living in communities all across the country. So the work you're doing, I think, is relevant and important to the industry across the country. So we really appreciate that. So semiconductors, here we are. We've got this technological marvel, a rolling computer on wheels called an automobile. Right. That relies on semiconductors to provide the benefits and the safety, the fuel economy, and the technology and convenience that consumers expect today. And there is an absolute shortage of these auto-grade semiconductors. Clearly, you saw this coming in to the administration and got right to work. So maybe you can focus a little bit on what the Department of Commerce has been doing to address this computer chip crisis.
Sure. Yeah, and you're exactly right. This is a crisis for the industry, but for just about every industry that you can find across the country. I mean, the thing that we have to remember is that decades ago, the United States was at the forefront in semiconductor development and chip development. We were the ones who came up with the best designs, the most advanced designs, and unfortunately, we lost that productive capacity, that leadership. Most of it has gone overseas. And the challenge that we have now is really sort of a perfect storm. As the Internet of Things is taking the world by storm, as the auto industry in particular has developed more capacities in all of the different types of vehicles that are coming out. We also, there was more of a demand for the chips that we saw coming, but then we hit this pandemic, and that just threw a wrench into everything that we had going on. So the ability to produce the chips at the scale, the pace that's necessary, not just for the auto industry, but for every industry, was a real problem for the world. It's something that we're trying to dig out of right now, but it's going to take a whole lot of work. It's something that the administration is very focused on. We certainly here at the Department of Commerce are spending a lot of time trying to find the ways that in short term, medium term, and long term, we can deal with the challenges that industries are facing. On the short term front, there's not as much that we can do directly within our power, but we can help provide more information. We can provide, we launched this early alert system that I'm sure you've heard about, where we can begin to get information to flag things that are going to be challenging for all industries, particularly for the auto industry, so that we know that if there's a COVID outbreak in near one of the manufacturing plants, or there's the challenge of a weather emergency that will slow down the production, we can know in advance, and maybe we can take some types of actions to deal with that. So that's what we can do on the short term. Again, it's more data and information, that predictability that we need. In the medium and the long run, we're actually working on things that we can make better investments, smarter investments from the USG, as well as working with our partners in the private sector, so that over the longer term, we actually have the ability to increase the type of chips that are necessary, including not just the advanced, the leading or bleeding edge, but also legacy chips, because we know that there's constant innovation. As some people might not realize, there's constant innovation in legacy chips as well. So thinking about ways that we can help increase production, have more fabs and fabless firms growing in this country, so that we aren't as reliant on the rest of the world, but we also have the ability quickly to get more chips out to our automakers and other industries.
Yeah, I really appreciate that way of thinking about it, the short term, the midterm, and the long term. And my sense of it is that you're right. I mean, what we're seeing currently in this current supply-demand imbalance is really, just as we are with other supply chain issues, really kind of a result of the pandemic, where the pandemic may have accelerated and exacerbated some challenges that were probably already playing out in this semiconductor supply chain, but really to a really terrific extent. I love this idea, by the way, of the early alert, and I think that that's important, because you're right. There might be a plant in Malaysia or in Vietnam, for example, where their response to COVID could, the information that a manufacturer might have about that could be helpful to you. So that does make sense to me. I also appreciate the idea that data is important here. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how the department sees data and some of the work you're doing to at least get as robust a picture of the current landscape as is possible.
It's a great question, and it's really important to flag the need for data. It's a challenge that I think that every industry has had as it relates to chips, that we just don't know, we don't have a full picture of what's going on with the whole supply chain. And so for us to be able to gather information and provide it to industry in a way that's consistent, that reduces the amount of questioning about whether the data is reliable, is really important to companies. And so that's why we put out a request for information to industry, to get that data. We're not trying to get proprietary information about who's producing which chip and how they do it. It's more to get an understanding of how the supply chain is working or not working. Who's operating in which part of the supply chain, so that we have a better idea of, and frankly, so the private sector has a better idea of how they can prepare for what's coming in not just in the short run, but in the medium and long term.
Yeah, so in other words, this data could also help the private sector, could help companies across the semiconductor supply chain maybe take different approaches, plan differently, or understand more effectively what can be done in the short term. I do think that's important. You referenced the idea that others are making wafers, and that we've kind of lost the manufacturing piece of this in the United States. I note that Congress is working on funding to support investments in reinvigorating that manufacturing and that development here in the United States. I would imagine that's a priority of the departments to support the passage of that bill.
Absolutely, and the president, the secretary, and I are all doing what we can to work with our friends on the Hill to have passage, because it's absolutely vital that we make the types of long-term investments that we need to prepare for the evolution, as we discussed, of industry. We know that we need, for our own productive capacity, we need more of that manufacturing going on here in the U.S. So it's not just the design, it's the manufacturing, it's the packaging, advanced packaging of these chips here in the U.S., so that we don't have to rely necessarily on what's going on in other parts of the globe. It's that supply chain resiliency that's going to be absolutely vital to our industry, our ability to continue to lead the world, particularly in the auto industry. So giving us that peace of mind is absolutely vital to our long-term health and viability as an advanced economy. And so that's why it's so important to get this legislation passed.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And what also resonates with me is the idea of supply chain resiliency more broadly. As I think about the semiconductor challenge that we're facing today, I can't help but worry. There's a part of me that worries that this could be a cautionary tale, that this could effectively be what we might see in the near future as we think about the necessary elements of the electric vehicle economy. So in other words, the raw materials, the processing of the raw materials, the development of batteries and other key components, that supply chain is going to be critically important to our competitiveness as we develop this EV future. And I do worry that there is an international race to control those supply chains now. So when you speak about supply chain resiliency, are you thinking broadly in these terms as well?
Absolutely. It's not just about the logistical side of the supply chain, which is absolutely critical, but it's also thinking about how we make sure that we have the resources that we need, critical minerals, for instance, that we have all of the components that allow us to be competitive. So certainly in the semiconductors, but it's also batteries. It's all the different types of the innovation chain, if you will, that are absolutely vital to us as a country. And so that's what makes up the supply chain. It's why we're in the process of standing up this Office of Supply Chain here at the Commerce Department, because we need to know all the things that we can do and are and should be doing to make sure that the supply chain is never going to be affected the way that it's been over the last 12 months. It's also protecting what our needs will be, not just for today, but for the next 20 to 50 years, making sure that we're making the bets that we need to make now, the investments to protect all the different parts of the supply chain.
So the Office of Supply Chain Resiliency is really almost like a shift, a long-term shift, an idea. Yes. You're preparing for the future, not just responding to what's happening right now, say with the current semiconductor situation. So that's I think important for people to know, and again, it's another area where I think there's a lot of relevance for the technology and automotive space. I want to sort of broaden this conversation a little bit. We're talking about enormous economic investments that provide benefits. They provide benefits to consumers, safer vehicles, smarter vehicles, more convenience, more safety, fewer emissions. But they also provide economic opportunity in communities where people are developing and building and servicing these vehicles. And it raises a question for me about how do we ensure that those benefits are shared broadly, whether that means across consumers broadly, for example, and not just certain consumers, or whether it means communities broadly, not just certain communities that we might think of as traditional automotive communities or that we might think of as traditional technology communities. I know you're thinking a lot about this and doing a lot of work in this space, so I'd love to understand how you think about this.
Well, this is really almost the most important part of all this. We have to remember that none of this is done in silos, that the success of our supply chain, that our ability to produce the EVs and the autonomous vehicles of the future depends on the whole system working in conjunction with one another. And it also means that we have to have our communities that are stable, that are resilient over the long term, that have productive capacity of the employees, that employees are trained to the levels that we need, that everything is working together. So that's part of the reason that the President has proposed the Build Back Better agenda, the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which will ensure that we have investments in roads and bridges, the likes of which we haven't seen since the development of the interstate highway system. Our water systems. We know that water is a critical component of things like semiconductor manufacturing, so making sure that our water systems are upgraded. But it's also doing things like investment in broadband. We know that too many of our communities are disconnected from broadband, and so that means that we're not unlocking the entire potential of the American workforce. So those are certainly important investments. It's also what some people would say are the soft infrastructure investments. Things like making sure that everyone has access to the best health care, making sure that people have access to child care. There are millions of Americans right now who can't go to work. I know that this is something that is facing the auto industry as well as many other industries. Some of these jobs can't be filled right now because we have, like I said, millions of Americans who would like to work outside of the home, but because they're taking care of their kids or they're taking care of their elderly loved ones, they can't. So part of the Build Back Better agenda that we believe Congress will pass includes the massive investment in ensuring that Americans are able to get back to work because they have the child care they need. But sort of stepping back again to think about this, local communities are only as strong, and the businesses that are located in them are only as strong as the strategic development of that community, as they think about their connection to universities and colleges, that they think about the workforce that they need, not just for today, but for tomorrow, which provides that ability to innovate, to help drive economic growth, that we're building the types of quality jobs in our companies that allow people to have their families living safely and stably. Basically, the quality jobs that we need in all of our communities. The auto industry has done this for years and years, working in close partnership with unions. So all of that is part of what we have to do. That we're building resilient, economically strong and viable communities to help ensure that our businesses are innovative, that they have the capital that they need. And I should say this, the President talks about this a lot. The reason that the United States is so successful, and we've been so successful over decades and decades, is that we have the ability to predict for the long run, and have that consistency and that reliability. That's what allows the CEOs, senior executives, to base their decisions not just for tomorrow, but for decades. So we have the rule of law. We have the most innovative capital markets in the world. We have a workforce that works hard and is more capable than any other in the world. And we have this spirit of innovation like no other around the world. That's what allows us to be the best country in the world, and I think will continue to allow us to lead the world, but it's going to require all these types of investments that we've just been talking about.
Well, Deputy Secretary Graves, it's been such a great pleasure and an honor, really, to spend time with you today. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure as well. Thank you, and thank you for everything that you and the team are doing to help us make sure that the United States continues to outpace and out-innovate the world.